the power of gathering, right? We understand that our grandmothers gathered, our aunties gathered. The gathering is where the magic happens. The gathering is where community happens, right? So today is that day where we have the opportunity to gather. 5 years ago, when we first had our very first AfriWomen Gathering, we would have never imagined that it will become something virtual. And here we are, even in a much bigger space with so many amazing women who are joining us today. So when women gather, dreams unimaginable to us are birthed. The dream started at AWDF and AWDF USA years ago, and here we are living that dream. Today, we are here at the first AfriWomen Gathering with the theme of Inform, Connect, Amplify. And that's exactly what you're going to get today. So let's just get this day started. Before I do, I'd love to see some of, oh, wonderful. We have Dumeleng from Northampton, Massachusetts. Yeah, these are some amazing. Sally Bonani from outside Seattle. Ojeku from Accra. We have some amazing, amazing languages. Keep just sharing your hellos in your language. Wherever you're from, let us know. And let's just keep the conversation going in the chat. I'm now going to hand over for us to kind of officially kick off the day to our board chair, Mame Afoniel Bersai, to kick off the day, and so we can get things started. Wherever you are, if you're already feeling kind of the energy in the space, just choose an emoji that speaks to you. Choose an emoji, it could be the heart, it could be the confetti one, just choose an emoji that speaks to you. And welcome, welcome, welcome. It's going to be an amazing day. Mame?
Oh, hi, yes, sorry. Hello, everybody. This is awesome. I am so excited for us to be here. So as Moyati said, my name is Mami. I am the chief weaver, and I'm borrowing this from Auntie V, who is on here. I'm the chief weaver for AWDF USA. A few years ago, Auntie Abby, started courting me, and she'd be asking me some interesting questions, and I'm like, why is this woman bothering me? Why is she asking me all these questions? Little did I know that it was just all a setup. Auntie Abby knows how to make one big setup, but here we are, and I'm just so excited for us to be here to be having this inaugural session. So I want you to make some noise. This is a celebration. So I want you to unmute yourself for like a second, right? Maybe, okay, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and make some noise. If it's clapping, clap. If it's jumping, jump. If it's come on and do this. Let's get some noise in here. This is something we need to celebrate. You don't do it enough. Give yourself a hug. Everybody a high five, work it like that, take it to the roof, take it to the roof. All right, celebration time.
So much energy.
Okay, all right, enough of my craziness. I just want to kick us off by acknowledging where we are sitting and the context in which we are sitting. We are sitting in the context of 2020 that has brought us to 2021. A year that really brought us both burdens and blessings. And the burdens I see have built so much resilience. A lot of us have pivoted, have adapted. A lot of us have shifted. A lot of us have evolved. All of those things have happened. I don't want to focus so much on the burdens. I want to focus on the blessings and the silver linings that 2020 has brought to us. And, I just had to put a few things there so I don't forget it. For me, one of the things that I really learned out of 2020 is to focus on the essentials. I don't know the last time I wore a shoe and like really dressed up to go somewhere. Like my clothes are in the closet and my shoes, I don't even remember, right? But it's the essentials that we all need. That we should cherish the joy we have rediscovered in family. That we should embrace the intricacies we have uncovered in ourselves, in others, and in nature. A lot of us have been in nature in these past few months or this past year, that we should cherish the sacred silence in stillness, the sacred silence in being still, and that we celebrate the treasure of friendship and what is happening here of sisterhood, and enjoy the profound pleasure in everyday things like taking a walk, reading a book, baking. I've been baking bread, you know, just been watching those pounds, but baking, all of those things. That is what 2020 has offered us and has ushered us into 2021. We are still sitting with some of these things or all of them in so many ways. So I wanted to presence that as part of our context and the background for which we sit here for this inaugural Diaspora Gathering. And then I want to add that what you are witnessing today started as a tiny seed, a seed that has been planted in the right soil and nourished with passion, dedication, commitment, diligence, understanding your vision and your calling, collaboration, teamwork, with an abundance mindset, shifting ourselves from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, shifting ourselves from a place of sabotage into supporting, shifting ourselves from a place of criticizing each other to a place of celebrating each other, celebrating our achievements, our accomplishments, and amplifying our voices. And a place of really understanding the importance of self-care. And as AWDF has always said, a place where we celebrate voice, power, and soul, because that is who we are. And in this process, there are a few lessons I've learned, and I'm going to run through those quickly. And the first thing I want to say is 1 yes is all you need to unlock many other yeses. Just 1 yes. When Auntie Abby was courting me and setting me up and all of that, you know, I remember when she asked, okay, it's time for you to take this baton. And I was like, ugh. But I said yes. And because I said yes, every other person you see here, their yeses have been unlocked. So all it takes is 1 yes to unlock other yeses and unleash destinies and bring potential out. The second thing is don't despise small beginning. Do not despise small beginning. Humble beginnings, they may look small, they may look inconsequential in your eyes, but don't despise them because in there is a seed with a huge potential. And the third thing is use what you have to build. Birds take broken sticks to build their nest. At AWDF USA, we do great with friend raising. We have so many friends. We don't have a lot of funding, but we use what we have, and what we have is ourselves. So we bring our full selves to this space, to this work, understanding our purpose, understanding our power, understanding our calling. That is who we are. So use what you have. And my question to you is, what do you have in your hand? Don't despise that thing you have in your hand. There's power in it. It's a seed and it has potential. What do you have in your hand? The fourth thing is do not let impatience make you abandon your assignment prematurely. Sometimes we are in a hurry, you know, to go from point A to point Z. We want to sprint. It is not realistic. It doesn't happen. That is the idea of being a superwoman, but we are not superwomen. We are whole women who bring all of who we are, our tears, our trials, our triumphs, our failures, our successes, our intellectual capacity, all of who we are, our giftings, our talents, our faith, everything. We bring all of that. So let's be patient and go through this race with grace and gentility to ourselves and extending to others, so that our impatience will not make us abandon our calling prematurely. Let's remain steadfast and not compromise and not to give up. And I will add, last but not the least, open your eyes and your ears to hear and see when destiny helpers are calling out the gold in you. When Auntie Abby kept, talking to me and asking me to come into the space, I knew that Auntie Abby saw something that I couldn't see. She saw gold inside of me and she called it out and I gave it a chance. So take a chance. Take a chance. Trust your gut and show up with your full self. Be that whole woman who looks to create a whole world by bringing all of who you are. I'm grateful to Auntie Abby. I'm grateful to Jacqueline Copeland, who actually was part of this community before, because Jackie was the one who put me in like a board position when I wasn't even thinking about it. I was minding my own business. She kept pushing me in this space. So I'm grateful for destiny helpers who see the gold in us and call us. And that is why I'm sitting here as the chief weaver of AWDF USA to see this inaugural gathering here. And I would say that in that spirit, surround yourself with women who will mention your name in important places. Surround yourself with women who will mention your name in spaces that matter. And when you have been given this opportunity, what we are doing at AWDF USA is about stewardship. Stewardship. How do you steward the power, the access, the opportunities, the giftings that you have received? How do you steward those things? We are at a time where the baton has been passed to us. The mic has been passed to us. And I want to encourage each one of you, don't drop the mic. Don't drop the mic. So with that, I want to bless our inaugural Diaspora Gathering with the power of voice. I'm going to sing a very simple song to welcome you all. So this is me sharing my whole self through my gift of song. So come with me on this journey to the places we've never been, making a difference each day. Come with me on this journey to places we've never been, making a difference each day. You've been gone for much too long. Stand up, please, and say, I am free. Don't forget, we can change the world together. So welcome home. Welcome home. Aquaba. Welcome home. Karibu sana. Wezalo, welcome home to a bienvenue. Welcome home. Aquaba. Welcome home. Thank you.
Woo.
Beautiful.
Wow. Thank you.
Auntie Abby, over to you.
Glorious. You know, when someone has the gift of song and share it so generously, you have to respect it. Thank you so much, darling. That is very, very welcoming. And that song too, you know, some of us of a certain age, that is a very special song for us. So here I am. I'm just here just to say it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be part of this continuing journey that for some of us started 21 years ago. And it is, you know, Mami is right. We were collectively anxious about passing on to another generation and trying to figure out who and how. And there was Mami. So we knew who, we just needed her to acknowledge this, because what was important was figuring out the how. And I'm so proud that with Moyatu and Nana and all of you, she has found a different way to figure out the how and really move us. And yes, AWDF USA, our friends have increased exponentially over the last few years. And it is wonderful. We never lose sight of the fact that we exist because of AWDF. And Abigail, I'm sure, will address that. But you need friends who will give you the funds. And we are taking it one step at a time. And I'm so proud of this particular step. I wasn't sure what I was going to say this morning, but after Mami's words, I've decided to tell a story of something that has just happened this week, really to affirm the dual things of the networks of solidarity and listening to the spirit in us and getting the affirmation of that spirit through the people of faith who surround us. So it's a strange story. Abigail is part of it, but I think it's an important story. As some of you know, I'm Ghana's ambassador to Brazil. I'm currently in Ghana, but I have just been reappointed, and I'm waiting for the bureaucracy and COVID permissions, vaccine permissions and all of that to move. So I hope to be in Brazil within the next 10 days or so. Now, one of the things that I have done is change my household staff. The Foreign Service allows us to go with 2 people who are in our household to take care of us, take care of our house, help us host parties, as well as act as our personal assistants and so on, distinct from the confidential secretary provided by the ministry itself. I'll try not to make this a long story, but it's important. I went with 2 wonderful women, one of whom, they were both single when I took them, but one was betrothed and her beloved said, yes, you can go for 3 years. And when she comes back, we'll get married and then I will join her there. The other went and met a Ghanaian and married him and already has a child. They are both in Ghana now, one to show her child off to the family, the other one because she came and got married in December. Now, the one who got married in December announced a couple of weeks ago that she and her fiancé have decided not to return to Brazil. So I had to quickly find her replacement. And what you do at times like this, you look for people you trust to help you. One of the people I called was Abigail. Abigail listened to me, listened to what I needed, helped me draft and figure out a kind of job description, and then sent me somebody to look at. Another person I called is somebody that some of you might know, Millicent Ajay, at the Director of International Programs at Ashesi. I had about a dozen submissions, but the person I chose first was the young person that Millicent sent me. I saw her on a Tuesday night. I was very happy with her and said, this is who I want. But I had somebody coming on Wednesday morning, the person Abigail had sent. And out of respect for Abigail, I decided I'd see this person, although I knew I wanted the person I'd seen on Tuesday night. So this woman comes, she's wonderful. I can see why Abigail says I should talk to her, but I haven't really changed my mind. So I see her out. She very graciously thanks me for seeing her. And as she turns away, I hear the voice of the Spirit saying, but you're taking her to Brazil. It made no sense. And there's nobody standing about me. So it's one of those, what kind of nonsense is this? I don't get it. This can't be the voice of the Spirit except you knew it. I was confused. So biblically, we are told, when you need confirmation, talk to wise people. I have a younger sister who's very, very deep in the Spirit. My sister wasn't even home. I called her at work and said, something very confusing has happened. I'm bewildered because this makes no sense. Long story short, my sister agreed to see my two finalists. Same thing happened. She could understand why the first woman that Millicent had sent was my choice. Then the second woman came, the one Abigail had sent. When we had finished that interview and she left, Akosa looked at me and said, this is not a woman we can let go, walk out of our lives. And I thought, but what's going on? I only have one space. And my sister said, have you considered you needed to be taking the two of them? Now that's an unusual thing because it means the person I thought I was keeping is the person who 3 years ago, my sister sent me. So she's telling me that I could get rid of the person she sent me 3 years ago, who she's known for 12 years. The woman who's married and has a child in Brazil. It was a very strange thing to say. But when she said it, I felt convinced that it was the right thing. So this morning, so I called the two women and said, you're it, but I need you to come to my house next Saturday morning with the people you feel I should know. You know that thing that you put on forms, if something happens, who should be contacting in emergency? I need to know your emergency people. So the person Millicent sent came with her brother. The person Abigail sent came with her uncle, her sister, and the niece. And we are sitting there. Now I'm getting to the point of the story because they don't know each other. They're being introduced by me. They don't know who sponsored them. The two sponsors have been invited by me. So Abigail walks in and Abigail knows the young woman that Millicent recommended. She's a MasterCard Foundation scholar who Abigail had met from her role as on the board of the Wellesley College MasterCard Foundation people. So Abigail knows this young woman from Ashesi sponsored by Millicent. Millicent was a little late. Millicent walks in and sits down and turns around and looks at the sister of the person Abigail nominated. And she was a schoolmate of her, classmate, though, not just same school. They were classmates and they were both junior to Abigail at the same school. A complete circle. Just because at one moment I decided the Spirit is talking to me, I must take it seriously. And I had rested on the counsel of sisters that we all know. My biological sister and sisters like Abigail and Millicent. And then they walk in and they know each other. Literally, the circle was closed this morning. And I thought to myself, this is a lesson for us all in terms of how we recognize empowering, walking into the world as it is changing. So that story, which I wasn't expecting to tell, but this happened less than the meeting in my house finished about an hour and a half ago. Abigail has just had time to get home and turn on this meeting. So that's my gift offering. I didn't know what it meant, but I know it means something profound for all of us, which is why I've shared it The circle will always be unbroken if we continue to share our song. Thank you. There's Abigail.
Right.
Abigail, you're up.
Hi. Hello, sisters. Good afternoon. And well, I think it's afternoon you're into. It's a pleasure. I'm so tired listening to Profusia because everything is played out in a different way this last week. But more importantly, thank you very much, AWDF USA, for what you're doing, a group of vibrant young women who are holding the fort against all odds. And that is one thing we also made in the network. I also pay tribute to those who have come before you, including Professor Buzia, who to date, I still think she is the icon of intergenerationality. When you talk about intergeneration, making the effort to keep up that thing, she is one person I would say has and walked through the top. She hasn't left you, she's come along with you. There have been people with her, Barbara Phillips, Connie Williams, Connie Evans, and a whole lot of people, all with good intent to support AWDF USA. And we have seen AWDF USA go through a journey, and we're happy to see and work with a group of vibrant young women who would not let anything die under their watch. But talking about all this, I also pay tribute to the founders of AWDF, Joanna Foster of blessed memory, Dr. Hilda Tadria, who is still around with us in Uganda, and BC Adele Fayemi, who have brought us all together. You can tell how they've walked the talk throughout to start AWDF, and now we have AWDF USA, and even that they've been present. And I'm also happy to have Francoise on the call. And that speaks a lot, that some start, some continue. We pass on the baton. It's like, and at the same time, it's like having trees in the forest. You have the old trees, the young shrubs, and then the seedlings coming up. We all make up the movement. And this movement has been started with good intentions of sisterhood, with good intentions of feminist values and practice. And because we are actually on a drive to change the status quo and then to make sure that women's rights are obtained and attained, and women live a life of dignity. Throughout all this, we've been in partnership with different people to bring us this far. But just to cut things short into this afternoon, looking specifically at what you are driving at, we are seeing the birthing of new things, new thoughts, new ideas, and each one comes to fruition. Given the times we are in, the changes and other things, I have seen how AWDF itself as an organization have actually introduced different things over the years, all in the bid to get us to where we want to. And I've watched how AWDF USA has come this way. Sisterhood has been the glue that has held us together. And we are talking of sisterhood, not sisterhood without challenges. Otherwise, we would not be sisters, or we will not be human. It's sisterhood with challenges, acknowledging the challenges, taking time to look inside ourselves, see what we can correct, see what we can abandon, see what we can take forward, see who we can bring on board, how we can widen our tentacles to get new people and other things. This is the essence of sisterhood. Prof. has shared a lot. And for me, one thing that stood out is, though we are here in this space as individuals, our destinies are so much connected without knowing, without realizing. I've not had the time to talk about Mami and how we have been from when she was a Global Fund for Women. Now for summer, we haven't even talked with Julie Abrahams and how I found out the only family she's looking for in Ghana was the Fusama family, and they are just talking to me at that moment in the meeting. But basically, whatever it is, irrespective of the geography and where we are, AWDF is working for women's rights, and the women's movement is critical to attaining that women's right. And this brings together the entire geography of the African continent and beyond. And the only glue that can hold us together, and that is holding us together, is the notion of sisterhood. That when one gets into another country, we know that there's someone there to hold our hand to take us through. You don't have to know, it's just to call and ask that, is there anyone in this country I'm going to Gabon? Is there any sister in Gabon I can reach out to? Is there anyone I could speak to on a different topic? So AWDF, it's here this afternoon as an organization, as individuals. I'm here, Francois is here. Much as we support AWDF USA, we also believe that this is a period and the time that sisterhood must be personified in our lives, particularly at this stage and at this time of an epidemic that has unleashed so much mental health issues and difficulties on humanity. And we know it is happening at a time that we are still dealing with the usual bread and butter issues and deep issues sisters have battled with, and organizations like AWDF have been funding to address. These issues still persist, and our current situation of the epidemic has deepened it. This is the time that we need to stick together more, extend a helping hand, find out which organizations are there from AWDF's point of view. What are the additional and new things we need to bring on board in terms of the work we do to touch the very core of the lives of women and girls? For AWDF USA, I'm sure you've also scanned and seen what it is for women in the diaspora and women across the world that needs to be done at this stage. But one thing is certain, it is sisterhood that is going to take us through the journey. That comes first, and then resources come and all the other things. But to know there are sisters there we can reach out to, it's very important and critical to us at this stage. So I would leave off here and then we'll continue with the discussions as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Abby. It has been amazing. I don't know how everybody else is feeling, but I just feel like I'm hearing so much wisdom, so much brilliance from just some amazing sisters today. We do have a sister that we would like to officially recognize, and that is Miss Francoise Maduth, who is the newest CEO of AWDF, our mothership in Ghana. Francois is a Pan-African feminist, and she's from Cameroon, and she is passionate about women's rights. And we'd love for Francois to just say a few words before we transition to our next session.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Françoise Mudute, and yes, I'm based in Ghana. I'm the new CEO of AWDF. I didn't expect to share any words, so but I think what I'm going to say is first, thank you for opening this space, which I think is an important space, not only because of the sisterhood that is needed more than ever, especially at this very time, when what we feminists, especially African feminists, love to do is being in the presence of each other physically, hugging each other, crying together, holding each other's hand. We haven't been able to do it for over a year. It's been really tough, especially with everything we've been going through, a lot of grief, a lot of loss. And so there's this space really is the closest we can get to that. So I'm very grateful for it. I'm afraid I can't stay the whole time because it's kids time, family time, but I really couldn't miss it. The second reason I think I really wanted to be here is because I believe sisterhood and movement building for African women it has to be transnational. It has to be inclusive of all of us on the continent and in the diaspora. And I think this is why I believe the partnership between AWDF and AWDF USA is critical. It has a long history, which has been mentioned here. Um, it has to be, kind of readapted, redefined, reimagined, to borrow from Mami's words she used in a previous conversation, so that we can adapt it to our current realities. But it is a very important relationship, and that's very much because we believe there's no African sisterhood that is not transnational. So we hope that we we will continue to do this, to redefine, to imagining all of this, but everything we can do to be in support of one another, both individually and in organizationally, etc., we will do. Yeah. So that's all I want to say. Thank you, big thank you, and thank you for having me. Thank you for having all of us. Have a good conversation.
Bye-bye.
So much, Francois, for those beautiful words. And indeed, sisterhood has to be transnational. Before I hand it over to Ane, so we can go into the session that is focused on sisterhood, I'd like to share a really favorite quote of mine about sisterhood by Toni Morrison, a writer I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And the quote says, "She is a friend of mine. She gather me, man. The pieces I am. She gather them and give them back to me in all the right order." My question for you today, as you just listen to everyone speak, we've seen the thread of sisterhood that keeps coming up. My question to you is, who is your friend of mind? What are you going to take away from today that can shape and change your perspective of what sisterhood is, what African sisterhood is? Another quote that is really powerful is by the recently deceased, may her soul rest in power, Nawal El Sadawi, who writes, "Love has made me a different person. It has made the world beautiful," right? And so I want to encourage us to just love on each other today. We know how much the pandemic has just created so much space, right? Where, what Francois was referring to, we're people who like to hug and be in space with each other in community. And how can we cultivate that community today, even when we're on virtual? What could that love look like? And so without further ado, I would love to hand over the next session to One, who is going to be facilitating our session on sisterhood.
People have already started setting up the idea of what African sisterhood is, and just talking about how do we build communities, and also just, I think, building sisterhood even in a space of difference. I think I liked what Abigail said it's sisterhood, but we do have challenges. And one of the things that I'm always so critical in asking, who's really Africa? What is African? What does African sisterhood look like? How do we recognize it? How do we cultivate it? How do we invest in it? And I think the panelists that I have today would have, from that different backgrounds, would have an idea of that as we talk about building sisterhood in these challenging times when there's differences of class and backgrounds and all of these things. So I think on my list, I would like to start with Moadi, if she can introduce herself. And then one of the questions that I would want to start is, well, what does African sisterhood look like, and how does it manifest in your everyday life?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for organizing this space. This is such a warm and dynamic space, and I'm excited to be part of this conversation, to be part of African Women's Development Fund that I've known for a very, very long time, and for AWDF USA, which I'm so excited to see Mame leading. With regards to African sisterhood, for me, it means recognizing that we have a shared destiny as African sisters, no matter where we are around the world, that we recognize that what happens to one sister somewhere does impact us, does affect us. And it means also that if we have an opportunity to bring a positive difference in the lives of someone, that we take that opportunity, that we live into that moment. When we see an injustice somewhere, we don't just fold our hands. We don't just say, oh, that's far away. That's way off in Ethiopia. That's way off in in South Africa. No, it means that if you have a movement in your own space, you speak out on behalf of the women somewhere else. Because we know that injustices will happen no matter where we are. And we need to have that transnational connection. And so we need to speak out on behalf of others. And at times, it will be ourselves that are calling out for help. And we would love to have that solidarity from others from across the ocean. I speak as someone from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, living in the US, and having seen the devastation and atrocities that happen in the Great Lakes region that I'm from. But one of the heartening things has been the solidarity from sisters around the African continent, from women's movements around the African continent, who have spoken up and who have also taken the charge to say sexual violence is something that we have to bring to the attention of decision makers. We have to call it a war crime. We have to bring justice with regards to the perpetrators. Sisterhood also means that in everyday life, we look to see how we can somehow support each other. One of the ways that manifests for me is that if we have information, can we share it with someone else? I receive a lot of information with regards to professional opportunities, with regards to speaking opportunities, and it's a joy for me to be able to share it with other sisters who have expressed a need, who have expressed an interest in a particular direction for their life. And so I think that tells us that we actually have to be comfortable within our sisterhood to share our dreams, to share also if we need information, if we need help, that it's okay to ask for help, and that we know that that help can come from our networks far and near. One of the last things I'll say about sisterhood is that we can tell each other that it's okay to take a break. All of us are activists. We work hard. We're passionate about the issues that we work on. We work late into the night on issues, whether we're paid for it or not. But also recognizing that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to recharge. And it's also okay to make a mistake. And we don't hold ourselves to those mistakes, but we can move on and grow.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking of, Auntie B's article when it talks about where's your rapper, and this idea of like, different people pulling together to help someone out, and how that, like, you recognize what's your positionality, what's your privilege, what can you bring to the table to uplift. And as Mama was introducing this idea of like building a circle, building a sisterhood of women that will say your name in places that you're not are, and that idea, I think it's very important. And also the idea of safe space. I think you mentioned this idea that, we should be able to support each other, to feel comfortable enough to share. And I think that's really important, very profound also in this day and age where we're over hardworking. And I think one thing as well, the idea of reciprocity, I think in the podcast for Dr. Ambati, she talks about it and how it shouldn't be a one-way thing. We're always expected to give and give and give and give. And I think it's important when we cultivate to be like, how do we have these conversations? And it's one of the things that Abigail was talking about in this, it's sisterhood, but it have its challenges. And I think building on that, I would want to hear from Halimatu to talk about in understanding that, African sisterhood. I mean, Africa is not a village. We're not a country or a continent. We're women from diverse backgrounds with different things, different ideologies, and all of that. So in finding that and cultivating that space of difference, but also building, a solid circle where we are able to uphold, build each other despite the differences we have, whether you come from this religion or what, if Halimatu can just build on that, and like, what are the tools? How do we personify, as Abigail said, how do we personify the sisterhood that we keep talking about?
Thank you so much, Husuman, for the floor. And thank you so much to the aunties and sisters who have spoken. Your words are power, especially to us younger women. I love being in such spaces. I am so honored. And I had goosebumps earlier because of Mame's welcome, but also because I am here sharing the room with somebody who has inspired me greatly without even knowing it. Professor Abena Busia, I love your writing. I love your writing. It has given me really voice and space. And to me, that is African sisterhood. That is part of African sisterhood. We need to write about our stories. We need to write our narratives. We need to write from our own perspectives. and we need to rewrite our how we are represented. We need to rewrite our continent through the way we see it through our own eyes. And I had something written, but I will have to say this first. When I was a student at Wellesley College, actually, I really struggled initially a lot, because much of what was written about Niger, where I'm from, and Africa also broadly was something that I couldn't recognize. And I knew the place because I grew up there. That is my home. And a lot of times our voices as African women were represented in ways that I felt distorted our humanity, and distorted our agency, because we weren't part of the conversation in the way that we should. And I took a class with Professor Philomena Steady, and that class changed my life. That is when I started reading you, Professor Busia, and it was such a it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful to feel recognized, to feel seen in all of our complexity, and to see our narratives and our lived experiences deconstructed in a way that gave us agency, and that gave us dignity. It's so powerful, and I think that is part of that sisterhood. We need to look at global systems and academia and scholarship and look at what it says about us, what it also does to us. It has power, and we need to be in those spaces. And to me, African sisterhood, I think African women, we've been bringing out our rappers to protect and uplift each other's for centuries. We've been doing that for each other also in ways that change systems. So I think my the and one of the ways that has been done is that African sisterhood is also about opening doors for each other. African sisterhood is intergenerational, and it's also when a woman in a position of power pulls others with her. I like this quote by Charlie Shilzons, who says, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I really like to add to that, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair and hold the door open. Hold the door open for others and mention them at the table when you are at the table. And to this, I would just like to give a very quick example, which has happened of recent. One of the person that I would say is to me, not only a mentor, but a sponsor, an auntie, a mother who I met very accidentally in Niamey. It's Professor Usaina Alidu, who's at Rutgers University. I saw her at the bank and just said hello. And she responded, she asked about me. I told her I was a student. She took my number, my contact details. And fast forward 7 years later, today, we published an article in Oxford University Encyclopedia of African History this week. The article came out this week, and I cannot believe it myself, because I don't know. I didn't know people like me would publish in such places. It would not have happened if Professor Usaina Alidu hadn't messaged me to say, this is happening and I want you to be part of this. I want you to write this article with me. And that, to me, is the epitome of what it means to be there for, it is African sisterhood. I think I feel bad saying sisterhood because she's more of an auntie. But to me, that is the epitome of African sisterhood. It is pulling each other, mentioning each other, writing together with young scholars who don't even think they can. You tell us we can, we do it, and it's magical. And the last one, which African sister, if I still have a few minutes, I will quickly mention this. African sisterhood is also about systemic change. I loved what Moadi had said earlier. You know, when something happens in another context, it concerns us. And speaking about the systemic change notion, I would really like to focus specifically, because it can happen in so many ways, on women's political action. So I know that in a lot of African contexts, when it comes times to do political mobilization and political work, most political parties turn to young people and women. But oftentimes when it comes time for real representation at the table where decisions are made, women are often excluded. So in 1991, there was the large, I think one of the largest march in the history of Niger, the Women's March happened. And the reason why that happened was that women from all walks of life, not just in the capital city, including in rural areas, including in markets, you have really women who had university degrees, women who were working in the market, women who were working in random, in offices, came together and marched because the national committee that was in charge of setting the course of history for our country only had one woman out of 68 members. 68. And that one woman, eventually she said, you know what? If you're not bringing more women at the table, I resign. And that to me is African sisterhood. It's about saying, yes, you are at the table, keep the door open, but if you're not letting more of us at the table in the room, I resign. I resign, but I join a larger movement to make sure that change happens. So thank you. I hope I haven't taken too long, but this is what I wanted to add to the conversation.
Oh, it's okay. Who are we to stop a published author from, spicing us with the knowledge? It's fine. It's fine. I think I liked what you say, and I think when you're talking about this idea of representation, owning our own stories, and it's just so powerful. Like, but your dreams are valid. Oh, you must send us the link in the group so we can go read the work. Cite you. We'll cite you, even everywhere we'll cite you. Congratulations on that. And I think I'd want to invite Rebecca to speak next on this idea of representation and owning up stories, and what does it look like as a young person coming into the space, because I know she attended the AWDF session last year, and she was 16, if not 17. So how does African sisterhood manifest for someone who's so young, and how do we empower? Because one thing when you're speaking, Halima, you're saying, oh, I feel so bad calling her my sister because she's my auntie. And I'm thinking at the back of my mind, we should have, sisterhood that transcends those delineations of age and all of that. And so that it's not like, oh, I can't go and talk to my grandmother about this and what, which I think it's a lot of the things that we're seeing about feminism that tries to, disrupt a lot of intergenerational conversations that could be happening. For someone to think, oh, my great grandmother doesn't know what feminism is. Yes, but women have been doing feminism from way, way, way till before even white women were naming it feminism, right? So having that, I think it's important that we build that, we open that space, that sisterhood. It transcends space, it transcends age, it transcends all of these markers of difference, I think, that are meant to isolate people. So if Rebecca, the floor is yours to just share a bit on that.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Rebecca Tadayo, and I am from Tanzania, and I'm currently 17 years old. I just turned 17 today, the 27th of March.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So I'd like to give my definition of African sisterhood. So in my definition, Africans in general share the same history and culture, in the sense that cultures that oppress women are almost like prevalent in the whole African continent, such as forced marriages or unequal access to leadership posts. So, and like the cause of this oppressive cultures that oppress women is the toxic and sexist mindsets that have been passed on from generations to generations of Africans. So like what are we going to do about this toxic and sexist mindset? That is like where African sisterhood comes in. Like African sisterhood comes in, and it's important because it alleviates the effects that women are getting from this toxic and sexist mindsets. And how does African sisterhood manifest itself? Well, my ideas are similar like the previous speaker. I believe that African sisterhood manifests itself by sharing opportunities that you get with your fellow sisters. And especially in this COVID-19 times, like where I come from, Tanzania, many people are not aware that the world is shifting online. And right now there are bigger and better opportunities than ever. So like African sisterhood will manifest itself when you share an opportunity with your fellow sister who is unaware about the opportunities that are online, so that like they can keep on progressing during this COVID-19 times. Yeah, thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And I think this idea of like sharing and creating space, and when Mama was opening, talking about, this, in today's culture where people sabotage, critique, and this whole idea of tearing down, I think I want to, the last word given to Professor Busia to talk about how, in terms of thinking through intergenerational sisterhood, building those bridges and learning from each other, holding spaces for each other, finding an ethical place of listening, even though we might have differences, we might, be and holding different ideologies, and also just looking at today's context, so much competition. You go on LinkedIn, everybody's posting that it's just so suffocating at times. And sometimes I think most people feel isolated to not have conversation, to be like, I'm struggling, as Mwadi was saying, you don't have to be, Mama was saying, you don't have to be the superwoman doing everything. It's okay to, and how do we find those spaces? How do we create those spaces and cultivate with what tools, from your experience and all this time? So the wisdom from you would be very, very amazing to close this section on African sisterhood and intergenerational conversations and intergenerational feminism and building those bridges. Professor?
Sorry, am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. That's a very important question. And it is an answer that is both very simple and very difficult. And that is because it's an answer that requires a combination of courage and humility. And a certain amount of honesty. Because you see, the honesty part, because in truth, we are all, most of us, in the position where we could be co-opted and life would be much simpler. We don't need to fight because most of us have, I don't know, personalities, gifts, whatever, that most places would accept if we are by ourselves. And if we're not going to make noise about our Blackness, our sisterhood, our whatever. And that is, in one sense, much simpler. But it's a selfish life. But selfishness is sometimes simpler, And when I say it's a false idea of comfort, it's here for. But to live in families, to live in sisterhood, to live in any kind of community, first of all, requires humility to say, I can't do this alone. I don't want to be alone. I need people, which some people don't have the courage to say. And it requires courage, not only to say that, but then to say, then the space I occupy needs to be, if I want a welcoming space, I must create a space that welcomes those who need space. And that takes work. Halimatu, I was so happy for you to mention Husseina Alidu, a woman I love dearly, who is my colleague, my collaborator. Husseina and I have done so much work together, but I know she won't mind you telling me this story. Husseina is many years my junior. She came to Rutgers about, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so after me, 12 or 15 years after me. We had founded the African Studies Center at Rutgers, the Center for African Studies at Rutgers. And she, in fact, when we were founding the center and were looking for an executive director, she interviewed for that position. And one of the women on the committee came to the rest of us and said, this young, wonderful woman from Niger has just interviewed for this staff position. I don't want us to hire her for that staff position. We must go to the administration and tell them to hire her for a faculty position. That wasn't open, but we fought and hired Husseina in a faculty position. And then we had the joy, because Rutgers is very good at spousal hires, of getting Alamin Mazuri, the very distinguished nephew of Ali Mazuri, who is a professor and senior to her. But we always tease him that he is at Rutgers because he was the spousal hire. And he's at Rutgers because we wanted to keep his wife, you know. But the story I'm telling is that we needed somebody to be the director a few years later of the Center for African Studies. And we had asked Husseina to do it. And she had initially said no. And the wonderful historian, Carolyn Brown, an African-American who's a historian of African labor, and Mami was talking about ambushing. Mami, you didn't see an ambush like this one. Carolyn and I invited Husseina to dinner at my house. We served this wonderful seafood, which is the closest thing and we served this see. We know you can do this with your skills, your vision, etc. You know, we're here for you. We're here with you. And say,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Auntie Bisi.
No,
Thank you.
oh, our original mother, are you kidding? No, but I was just emphasizing the point that we have to support each other, put ourselves in each other's spaces, but also back each other up. You know, Carolyn and I gave Husseina a meal, which she appreciated and has never forgotten. And we said, this is why you need to say yes. And this is why we're asking you, and we will support you, but we will not leave you alone. And we supported her. And so by the time she was ready to step down, she could say the same to others and has continued to do so. She's a wonderful networker, supporter, everything. She does not forget people. She does not want anything back. She does not think people need to be like her or think like her. She just knows that people are doing work that creates spaces for people. And that's what we must do. But we can only do it if we're prepared to share stories and listen. And sometimes, yes, we are convicted. And sometimes people will speak to us because we need to be spoken to, but it all matters how we talk to each other. So I will tell one more story. One of my closest friends is the scholar Carol Boyce Davis. I'll be talking to her in about 3 hours' time. Today's a very busy day because it's 30 years since we published Out of the Kumbla, Women in Caribbean Literature. So we're all going to be sitting Zoom-like with our own glasses of champagne to celebrate that. But I met Carol Boyce Davis in the street many years ago when we were both lost looking for a session on African film at an African Literature Association conference. And she's a few years, 5 years or so ahead of me in the academy. And she, when I started out, came to every presentation I ever made in a conference. We've been Carol and I, when we go to conferences, we share rooms to the point where somebody at a conference sees me, they'll say, where's Carol? Sees Carol and they say, where's Abby? We are buddies. And I remember the year I was coming up for tenure, I was giving a lecture at an African Literature Association conference about women bonding. And some of the male professors, big name professors, who I knew my university was likely to ask to write about my tenure, were in the room. And I was terrified. And I gave this paper. In fact, it's the paper that is now published, that was published in Out of the Kumbla. And it was about women bonding and sisterhood and female bonding. At the end of the lecture, one of these men asked me a question, which I knew was a coded way of asking me if I was lesbian. I was mad, I was upset, I was terrified. Here am I was a single woman. I'm very heterosexual. I wanted to be married and all of that sort of stuff. And I thought, why are you putting me on the spot by asking me the question this way? I deflected the question and managed to answer it, but I wasn't happy. At the end of the session, Carol made me feel very, very good. I'm getting the internet is unstable, so I'm switching off my video because that can sometimes be a problem. But Carol took me out to dinner, made me feel good. And then the following morning, because we shared rooms, the following morning, she then said to me, now, Abby, yesterday when that happened, I could see your discomfort. I could see why. I'm glad you managed to answer the question, but here politically is what's going on. So you might need to think about this and how you would answer it in the future, because we also do need to show our obvious solidarity in times like that to our lesbian sisters. So don't let it slide. And she showed me a better way of dealing with the issue. Now I'm telling that story because she didn't get mad with me at the time. She didn't dress me down. She didn't point out how I could have done better on the day. At the time, she recognized my insecurity. It was a very good paper. It was very well received, and she said so and took me out to dinner. The next morning, when she knew I could hear it, I felt I had done okay. And so she knew I could receive the correction. She gave me the correction. She loved me enough to shelter me at the moment, and then the following day to counsel me about how I could do better. And she did both. She was sensitive enough to know if she had come right away and said, look, Abby, you didn't get what was going on. We need to do it. I would have been hurt. She also knew for my own sake, I needed to be alerted to what was going on. And she found a way to do both in ways that I could hear. That is sisterhood. That woman has remained my confidant for 40 years. If I'm writing something or troubled about something or need somebody to look at my professional work, I send it to Carol because she will tell me the truth. She will tell me the truth with love. And that's what we need. She doesn't want me to be her. We differ on a lot of things, but she is honest, clearly honest, in ways that have helped me grow, not in ways that have made me feel small. I am here where I am today because older people like Erelu, I am sitting at this table because a woman who is 10 years younger than me came to me and said, I want you at this table, please. I looked at her on that day and said, but I'm an academic. I don't know this activist world. She said, you are you, and it's what you say and what you do that makes me see you're in this space. And that is the truth. That is the truth. I am at this table because one day BC Adelaide Fayemi said to me, I need you in this space. And we've been holding hands ever since. So you will find sisters everywhere, and we need to be able to recognize them and say, here, we can shelter each other. I hope that answers your question.
Oh my God, I don't know even what to say. I don't even know. No, but I think it does in so many ways. And I think in today's culture, people tend to confuse honesty for being harsh and not taking stock of what exactly does the person need at this moment. Yes, I may have the truth for you or like correct you, but can it come now? Or like, I think that spirit of discernment, of knowing, of being open and holding that ethical space to be like, what does the situation want, and how do we respond with love, with care, with that humility as well, as you say. Yes. And I think that's very much important. Thank you so much. I think we can call Auntie BC if she wants to say something, just to add a bit, because she wanted to just come in and add to this, I think, profound conversation. I'm just so learning a lot. Auntie BC.
Oh, and she needs to be unmuted.
I think it's good afternoon over there, right? Or should I just say good evening, because it's evening over here. It's great to be with everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't join in at 5 o'clock. I had some engagements today that ran over, but I'm glad I was able to get out of the very last one to be here with everyone. I don't know if there's a specific question that you put to Sister Abby that you also want me to respond to, or you just want me to say something?
Don't say 2 hours, just something around like what's your take on building these intergenerational conversations and feminisms and bridges, because a lot of the times people tend to think age and the kind of context you come from stops you from, and where your feminism stops, that's where someone's oppression begins. So understanding how do we build African sisterhood that transcends all of these markers of difference, that transcends a lot of the differences that's in today's political climate end up polarizing people. So how do we build that cycle, keep it solid, even though there's issues, even though we disagree on a lot of things? So just on that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to enter into this conversation following on from a really valuable lesson I learned from my big sister, Professor Busia, who I fondly call Sister Abby. And it's about something that happened in June 2000 when we were launching the African Women's Development Fund. We had organized this evening event at the UN Millennium Plaza Hotel in New York. Everything was in place. We were not the ones catering or anything. The hotel was taking care of that. And we're staying at Crown Plaza Hotel, which is just behind the UN Millennium Plaza Hotel. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was running ready. And Abby asked me, is there anything I can do? Because I had asked her to be in the ceremonies for the event, and I thought that that was enough for her to do for us. But then she said, is there anything else you'd like me to do? And as she was asking the question, I took out the cocktail suit I was planning to wear that evening. A really nice, snazzy Harvey Bernard suit. It turned out that somehow a button was missing from the suit. And what that meant, and because we couldn't find the button, it meant that we had to change every single button on the suit. And I think we got the buttons somehow. One of my colleagues from AWF had got the buttons, but then we had to sew the buttons onto the suit. As Sister Abby said, give that to me, let me do that for you. And I looked at her, this big sister, as she said, she's older than me by some 10 years, professor, mentor, teacher, friend, and she was offering to sew the buttons on my suit. And she did. And I wore the suit to the dinner and we had a fantastic time. Now, she taught me a valuable lesson in sisterhood, in solidarity, in friendship, on how we all bring gifts to the table in this movement we call our home. And whether that gift is the gift of an essay, a lecture, a counseling session, some financial support to help a sister start a business, childcare for another sister, or simply a needle and thread to make sure that a sister does not feel that her life is running away from her because the suit she had her heart on wearing was not working. We all have gifts to bring to this movement. There is space for everyone. And when I hear younger feminists say, well, it's time for the older feminists to hand over to us. It's our time now. Yes, it's your time, but it's everyone's time. You can have a retired professor. You can have a retired engineer, a retired teacher. There's no such thing as a retired feminist. This is a space for everyone, regardless of our age, regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of the platforms that we occupy. And I should know one or two things about platforms because I've occupied different platforms during the space of my 58 years, which have allowed me to do different things, as part of this struggle of ours in the movement. So I want to encourage all of us to recognize that whatever we bring is valuable. Whatever age we are, we have a space in this movement. This movement should not be about one generation trying to shoo the next one off, or the older generation looking down their noses about how younger feminists don't know anything, about what has happened because we are the ones who went to Beijing and we are the ones who know where everything is at. This is a movement where everyone knows something, everyone can do something, and we face a common enemy, patriarchy. And that is the business that we all have to contend with, using our different skills and competencies. And of course, with a great deal of love, patience, perseverance, compassion, empathy, and our rappers. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join you. I will still stay on because I know it's supposed to finish at 7, but it's really a delight to be here. And it's great to see you again, my darling sister Abby. And all my other friends online, Mane, and everyone, Moyatu. Thank you.
It's good to see you too. Good to see you. Yeah. We are all here because of your work, my dear.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, the patriarchy is our common enemy. There's no such thing as retired feminists, so we must carry the audacity that the patriarchy carries, and soldier on as we hold space for each other as we grow together. So I'll be handing back to Moyati. Thank you so much for such profound insights and for the wisdom. I'm so inspired. Thank you.
Wow, I'm so blown away. Thank you all for the wisdom that you have brought so far on sisterhood. I'm sure everybody is buzzing and just taking down notes and just soaking it all in. It is truly a privilege to be here. We're going to now have a power talk from Moadi Mukenge, who you heard from earlier. After which we will probably see if we have time for Q&A, because we're a little behind time, not even a little, a lot. So we will see how we go with Q&A. But for now, I would like to hand it over to Mame to introduce Moadi Mukenge.
Hi. So they say it takes a village, to raise a child. And in raising Mame, the village that has raised me, Mwadi plays a very big part in that. And when I talk about Mwadi, my relationship with Mwadi definitely represents what I call tried and tested sisterhood. Mwadi was my boss when I was at the Global Fund. If you know me and you've come to me for certain things in terms of like writing and speaking and all of that, I learned a great deal from this woman. Most of my introduction into this work was under the tutelage of Moadi Mukenge, and I honor her. I honor her role in my life. I honor the sisterhood that we have built over all these years. And even though we are no longer at the Global Fund, that sisterhood continues. And it's such an honor for me to have her be in this space and to share with us on this idea of movement building. I can't think of anybody better to share on this topic than her. So Moadi, thank you for saying yes, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mame. It's an honor for me. Really, it is. It is. And congratulations on this space that AWDF USA has created for us to come together and share and be inspired and learn from each other. It's wonderful to see BC here. BC, I definitely learned from you so much while I was at Global Fund for Women, and I was inspired by everything that AWDF was doing. I had the opportunity to collaborate with you, and yes, it's full circle. It's definitely full circle, and so it's an honor for me. So congratulations, AWDF USA, on the launch of AfriWomen, this space for African women in the diaspora. And I'm starting to understand more the more I hear in this forum. You talk about the vision of it, but I think that you also want to harness the African women that are here in the US or who live outside of the continent to see what we can bring to the upliftment of the women's movement and to feminism. And so I've been asked to speak about African women's movements, what we can learn from them, the achievements and lessons learned. What can we take into the planning for AfriWomen so that it too becomes a vibrant and impactful movement. So many of us living in the US actually participate in organizations that represent our home country. We also might work on a specific project or passion that builds our communities back home. We have lived in our country, where we are for a very, very long time, but we also think of back home all the time. And at the same time, many of us have been part of collaborations bringing various Africans together. A specific example is the Priority Africa Network, which is a coalition based in the Bay Area of California, which represented multiple African countries. And when I moved to the Bay Area and I met the people who were part of the Priority Africa Network, I had found my social justice home. But as Africans, what we did was elevate the issues that were important to us, to make sure that we had an authentic voice around immigrant rights, about representation of Africa in the media and in public policy. We made sure that if there was a national conversation on Africa, that we contributed to those conversations, that there were not just conversations about us, but that we were part of that discourse and led that discourse. As Africans living in the US, we've also made sure that we were part of the planning around the census because we wanted to make sure that African immigrants were counted. We wanted to make sure that resources would come to African communities and that African immigrants would understand the importance of being counted. When I was in Los Angeles, I was part of Africans who came together to organize candidate panels. So this meant that we understood our power as voters, that we wanted the candidates to get to know the African communities. We're such a large size in the US. And so we organized these panels where they presented their platforms to us. And they could also hear from us in terms of our priorities and what we wanted to see in terms of change in the US. Now I turn my attention to the African continent because we have definitely all been inspired by the ways that women have organized since time immemorial to advance their rights, but also to change the inequality seen in their movements and their communities. On the African continent, women's movements have raised their voices to break the silence around violence against women. These are just a few examples. Early marriage and women's lack of land rights. When it was against the status quo, when it was uncomfortable for some, and when it was considered as against African culture, women's movements said no more. African women led the way to register civil marriages, to show couples how to write wills, and to pressure courts to honor women's property rights and inheritance rights. It's women's movements that have exposed the sexual violence that is endemic in armed conflict and uses women's bodies as the arms of choice. Women who have advocated so that rape and conflict is considered a war crime. Women who have advocated to create SGBV courts, where judges who have been trained hear the testimonies of women and give them the respect that they deserve. Women lawyers, as movement actors, have learned to use the law to secure justice for women. Similarly, we also have community courts that bring hearings to the village level so that women don't have to make the long, expensive trip to major cities to reach the court and get justice. In 2007, AWDF, Global Fund for Women, and Open Society Institute actually came together to work on these common issues of SGBV in the Great Lakes region as an example of a strategic partnership that could happen in the women's movement and to advance women's rights. It was African women who drafted the most progressive women's rights framework that had ever been presented to and adopted by the African Union. The Maputo Protocol is a comprehensive document which outlines specific rights that member states to the African Union are to protect and advance for women and girls. The Maputo Protocol stipulates rights around gender equality, around education, around land rights, around FGM, marriage rights, reproductive rights, and political representation, among others. It brings up issues that heretofore had not been discussed in legal frameworks and had not been discussed among a lot of decision makers. It's also the women's movement that is holding ministers of finance accountable to commitments that have been made at the African Union. As an example, to allot a specific percentage of national budgets to health. African Union that each member state would allocate 15% of their budget to health. What the women's movement has done is to then go back to their home countries and make sure and advocate for those dollars, those resources to actually come to fruition. Women's groups pressure leaders in their home countries to implement those commitments and see that budget decisions benefit women. I know that in Nigeria, since that particular commitment was made at the UN, we've seen some slight improvement in the percentage of budget that is allocated to health. As an example of another movement, young women have formed networks to make sure that information on contraception and sexual health is available via helplines, via digital platforms, and via their own presence as peer educators. And this helps reduce unplanned pregnancies and unsafe abortion. These indicators are the highest in the world. We know that these are critical issues that we need to work on. Africa continues to be the place where we see the highest rates of maternal mortality. And so we need to see movements around reproductive rights. If we want to see preventable maternal mortality, these movements need to be supported and strengthened. I'm glad to learn that AfriWomen is interested in reproductive health disparities because these disparities exist, whether we're in Africa or whether we're in the United States. Furthermore, women's movements have insisted that quotas for women in government must go beyond the numbers to translate to real power that women leaders can exercise to affect real policy change and demonstrate leadership that is transformational. On the economic front, as women, we have made a case for favorable banking products for women, for investment capital for our businesses. We recognize that women are the backbone of the African continent. Women are the backbone of the African continent. Many times we have been relegated to initiatives that only thought about microcredit. And I always say that we cannot live on microloans. A society cannot advance on microloans, but we want to impact economic policy. As women advocates, we want to impact trade agreements. We want to impact tax laws so that they favor the African continent and not our Western trade partners. With regard to the sustainability of our movements, AWDF triggered a movement where you challenged the traditional ways of resource allocation and made a case to an African-led entity that would make grants to local organizations that are engaged in advancing the rights of women and girls. You continue to push for transformation of philanthropy, and which is really critical, so that the philanthropic practices and priorities for women reflect African realities and not Western ones. All of these examples demonstrate that movements don't need permission to begin. Women saw a need and they did something about it. So far, AfriWomen has mentioned some key priorities around diaspora, philanthropy, reproductive health, disparities, and leadership development. All very, very key issues that need our attention. If you plan to engage African diasporans as donors, think of specific themes where you want to make a difference. As a movement, you have the opportunity to harness collective action, and you know that the power of numbers can move specific issues forward. There are a lot of diasporans I feel that would be hungry and open to joining you in advancing a movement towards social change on the continent. We have the opportunity to harness the skills of our collective. Just the people in this space, in this webinar, represent significant skill sets, significant knowledge that we can all draw upon. And think about the diaspora presence, not only in the US, in Europe, and other places. There's a deep well of talents and abilities that we can draw from to advance the African continent. Here in the US, statistics tell us that African immigrants are the most educated immigrant group in the US. We need to use that. Among immigrants in the US as well, we contribute more in remittances than is contributed through official development assistance. Now, this is really, really critical. When we think of the dollars that we're already contributing to the African continent, they supersede what governments contribute. So it's important that this movement also value partnerships. One of the things that we've learned in building movements and strengthening movements, the importance of working with others that also believe in social justice. The importance of working through intersectional approaches to our work, and also looking at multi-issue activism, not focusing on just a single issue, but really seeing the intersection between the root causes of oppression and how we can organize together. As you know, movements don't need validation from others. There will be periods, however, when the issue you work on is in the public space, is getting a lot of attention in the media, and you're getting recognized. But often we do this work quietly when society and donors are supporting other issues. Even internally at times, as advocates, we are very active, and maybe our members also are very active. And other times when we go through a slow period, we go through a lull. And so I would venture to say for AfriWomen, do not give up during those slow periods. Working with a few is perfectly fine. Perhaps in those moments of quiet and calm, we'll come up with our best thinking at times. Movements and money. Movements and money. Now, movements can grow without money because we also recognize the power of our passion. When we all have passion towards the cause that we believe in, we put in hours and hours, whether we're getting money or not. However, in order to fund our women-led institutions, we know that funding is important, and we know that we have to raise resources. We also have to raise resources from a range of funding sources. We need to have diversified strategies. We constantly have to think about sustainability of our efforts. And we also have to address the assumptions of donors and bring them along to understand our perspective on what change is possible for African women and girls. We have talked in this space this morning about the fact that movements need to be replenished, being intentional about bringing others in, making sure we bring in diverse voices, making sure that we cultivate leadership skills. As African women living in the US, I have a specific message I also want to raise with regards to the opportunity we have for those who live in the US. We must understand how US policy impacts our home countries and the African continent as a whole. We have to go beneath the superficial understanding of public policy to understand who makes the decisions and how to influence more favorable terms for the African continent. I want to mention an example of an organization called Gender Action, which is based in Washington, DC, and which assesses the gendered impacts of trade agreements and development projects by mining companies, multilaterals, and international finance institutions. By working with women's networks in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America, they have been able to stop mega development projects that threaten livelihoods and that threaten the existence of entire communities. That type of focus looks at the big picture and how our engagement as diasporans can make a difference in the lives of millions of everyday women. I work at IPAS, a reproductive rights organization based in North Carolina, but working globally across 18 countries. And one of our current priorities is to assess how US policy negatively impacts the reproductive outcomes for women around the world. In addition, there are advocacy groups in Washington, DC, and other places around the US that advance an African agenda, but without African voices, and oftentimes could definitely benefit from our voices if, as African diaspora women, we engage and make ourselves known. We have an opportunity to bring pressure on these issues. What pressure can we bring on the key issues of our time? We know that we are at a time of significant global shifts, a time of significant key conversations that are happening, that are recalibrating how Africa relates with the rest of the world, how Africa relates with philanthropy, how Africa relates with our own governments, our African governments, and how issues of sexism and racism are deliberated. It is a time that is celebrating African women's leadership. And so we have an opportunity to focus on these big picture issues and bring our contribution to building a better tomorrow. I end with a question. As the African Women's Development Fund USA launches AfriWomen, I ask you, what big picture issue will you take on to shift the needle for African women today? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we all just like give a round of applause, some snaps? That was just amazing. Thank you so much for dropping so much wisdom. I think something you shared that was so powerful was this importance of quietness and how we take that for granted. But sometimes it is when things are quiet is when we're really able to create and think and make powerful moves. And I really liked your point about the things we take for granted in being in diaspora, which is influence in policy and decision making. So thank you for amplifying that. We're now going to transition to our next session, which is also a favorite of mine because we're going to be talking about voice. Social movements require participation by many. So we're really now going to take some time to talk about what is your role? What is your voice in social movements? So I'm going to hand it over to my sister Obenewa so she can take it away.
Good day, ladies, wherever you find yourself in the world. I myself am in Johannesburg, and it's always just such a pleasure to gather together. You know, so many references to sisterhood, references to people like Toni Morrison. And as I listened to all of our speakers who brought so much knowledge and so much passion and so much power, the words from Toni Morrison that kept coming to me were when she said, "You are your own best thing." Right? And I think that in this room, in this space, it is a reminder that as African women, we are our own best thing. And because we're our own best thing, we are not new to this idea of activism. We're not new to this idea of change. We might not always have called it that. And in fact, if you all could just do this for me, in your reaction buttons, if you have the latest form of Zoom, the latest update, you'll be able to say a yes or a no. In the chat, you can drop a Y or an N, or just give me a thumbs up if your answer is yes. But how many of you consider yourselves activists? Okay, I see a couple of people are saying they consider themselves activists, but just let me know in the chat, on screen. Okay, I see lots of people saying they are an activist. Excellent, I love that. I see lots of people who aren't saying anything either, right? And I think sometimes it's because we can be a little bit unsure. I remember the first time I was referred to as an activist, I was like, who, me? Never mind, I just put together an entire conference, right? Auntie Abby was speaking earlier about when she was approached to join AWDF, and she said, I'm not an activist, I'm an academic. And I think the challenge for us today is to begin to define our roles in social movements. Because as African women, as we said, what affects one of us affects all of us. That means that we each have a role to play in bringing about the type of change that we would like to see. But it can often be difficult to locate ourselves and to locate the place where we're supposed to make a contribution, because there is so much that often needs to happen. And, you know, we're also doing daily life, jobs, careers, families, things like that. And so today I wanted to share with you the work of a woman by the name of Deepa Iyer. Deepa is based in the US. She is of Southeast Asian descent. And she has come up with this concept of mapping our roles in the social change ecosystem. And so I'm going to go through these roles with you briefly, and then we're going to have an opportunity in our breakthrough rooms to talk amongst ourselves and just to begin to think about what roles might we play right where we are. And then we'll come back and have a broader discussion about how we can begin to take some of the ideas of sisterhood forward and how we can practicalize this idea of extending our wrappers to other sisters. So according to Deepa, there are a number of roles that we tend to play in movements. When Mame opened, she spoke about the fact that she is the chief weaver for AWDF USA, right? So we have people who are weavers, we have experimenters, we have frontline responders, we have visionaries, we have builders, caregivers, disruptors, we have healers, storytellers, and guides. And all of these roles are necessary if we are going to see the type of change we want to see. And so just to go through them briefly, weavers are people who are able to see through the lines of connectivity. I know many of you could attest to the fact that Mame is a weaver because you might be here because of her. She introduced you to someone. You might be a weaver in your own place. You're most likely a weaver if you're the person that somebody calls whenever they need a recommendation or a reference about something. We also have the experimenters, the people who aren't afraid to innovate, to do things differently, who wake up every day and think, how can I break the mold and do something in a new way, who aren't afraid to take the risk, but who can also course correct when necessary. And then we have frontline responders. I think in many of our imaginations, frontline responders have been privileged as people who are the quote unquote real activists or the real change agents. These would be people who you would see organizing the protest, using the bullhorn, bringing the community together. And they play a critical role, but it's not the only role. But here we might be privileged to have some frontline responders amongst us. And then of course we have visionaries. Visionaries are the people who are able to imagine something new for us and who are able to help us imagine something new for us collectively. They're the people who help us see not just the reality of our current context, but they help us see a future that we could potentially create. And then of course we have the builders. We have the people who develop and organize and implement ideas and who really build institutions for our collective good. And then we have caregivers. And I think it's particularly important to talk about caregivers in a feminist space, right? Because we know that caregiving is something that is often associated with women, and it's something that's often so incredibly undervalued, right? But it's not a by the way kind of secondary task. Caregiving is necessary. It's essential for us to keep going and to keep doing this work and to keep building community. And then of course we have the disruptors, people who might make you a little bit uncomfortable. So when I was listening to Auntie Abby speak about Carol Boyce Davies, you know, her coming to you and being like, actually, this wasn't on. There was a better way to handle this and a better way to show solidarity. This was probably a point at the time where, you know, sexual orientation, gender identities weren't on the agenda in the same ways that they are now. And so that could have been a disruptive action, simply saying, this is some of the work we need to begin to do and to stand in solidarity. And then of course, there are the healers, because we know that when we shatter glass ceilings, we can also get cut. There are bruises that come with that, right? And there's got to be a place, there's got to be a balm. There have to be those amongst us who, in the words of Toni Morrison, can be of the mind and who can help put the pieces that I am back together. And then of course we have storytellers, and we have a master storyteller in Auntie Abby, who has told such powerful stories that help us see ourselves in the potential of who we could potentially be. And then we have guides. I would consider myself a guide, someone who teaches and who advises and who coaches and who consults, right? To help other people do the work that they do that much more powerfully. And so we're going to go into breakaway rooms, and you will have a facilitated session. We'll be together for a few minutes. Moyatu will give us detail on that. But in those breakaway rooms, I'd like to invite you to begin to think expansively about what role is most natural to you. What is the thing that you see yourself doing that, you know, you might not necessarily even consider an act of activism, but is certainly an act of service for all of us. And I think in terms of considering our roles, there are a few things that we need to keep in mind. The first is that no role is better than another. And I'm going to repeat that. No role is better than another. Because of the era in which we live, it's often, if you don't have the biggest bank account, if you're not able to speak as loudly or as eloquently, you don't have as much to offer, but that's simply not true. The other thing is that you might be having a hard time identifying yourself here, because often our gifts and talents are so natural to us that we don't even recognize them as gifts and talents, right? I often say that our purpose is hiding in plain sight. And coming through in the chat, there's a question about multi-roles. And yes, we will have multi-roles throughout our lives, depending on our circumstances, depending on the skills we learn, depending on the needs of a particular movement. And the importance of really beginning to identify where you are is that you can then begin to make strategic choices about where you deploy your time, where you deploy your attention, what skills you develop, and what areas you can be most effective in. But that will certainly change and evolve over time. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Moyatu just to give us some quick instructions. We'll head to the breakaway rooms, and then we'll come back for a facilitated discussion. And I will be here in the main room in the event that you have questions or clarifications that you need. Moyatu?
Thank you so much, Obenoa, for kind of setting the stage. We are aware that we are at time, and we just wanted to ask folks, we know some people may have things to do, but we'd love to kind of extend out a courtesy to say, if you're able to stick around for another 30 to 45 minutes, we'd appreciate it, just because we have just a few more segments to get through. So we're gonna go into our breakouts, but we're going to go for 10 minutes. So we're going to kind of cut it short a bit and then come back. So you'll be assigned to a breakout room. All we ask is that in your breakout room, just assign a lead so that the lead can come back and kind of share out any things that kind of come out of your discussions. So I'll hand over to my sisters who are organizing the breakouts to send folks to breakout rooms. And we'll give you a cue at 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you.